The first episode of Series 1 of the Monkees was broadcast on BBC TV on the 29th of December 1966, 3 months after its American airing. The BBC's TV listings magazine, Radio Times, described the show as a new film series for the young in heart, starring Davy Jones, Peter Tork, Mickey Dolenz and Mike Nesmith, who find the deck stacked against them in royal flush. On the opposite page was the classic black and white photo of the whole group posing as cowboys from the first episode, with the headline beneath, "The Monkees, a swinging new series from America about a 4-man pop group." Then the following text was written underneath the photo and headline. 6:15, off the launching pad tonight is a new series which is driving American television viewers wild. Called The Monkees, it stars 4 long-haired young men who encountered adventures as a pop group. What do the Monkees want? Blah 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 blah. But at least the BBC was honest in telling the viewer that the Monkees were the creation of American television executives. Not that any teeny boppers looking for fresh-faced cuties to idolise would have been worried about who created them. The first episode was titled Royal Flush and revolved around the assassination plot of Princess Bettina. The strange programme titles didn't end there. The second episode was titled Monkey See, Monkey Die. It's easy to identify the template used to model and promote the first Beatles and then the Monkees. Both old and new models dressed in identical suits for promotional photos provides a clear indicator. Even down to Davy Jones, being born in Manchester and having a Northern English accent, so much loved by American female fans. Paul McCartney and Davy Jones were the heartthrobs of the two bands, the cuties, and arguably the best-looking members of their respective bands, the girls' favourites. However, judging by the photos taken in March 1966 at the premiere of the movie Alfie, the once baby-faced Beatle Paul was starting to look less youthfully photogenic than his Monkees Davy Jones counterpart. Paul probably isn't smiling much for the camera because he still has a chipped tooth from his Boxing Day 1965 moped crash. From November 1966 onwards, the once fresh-faced Beatle Paul would be photographed with a somewhat longer face and sporting a moustache, a trend which the rest of the Beatles would shortly follow. In December, EMI released a collection of Beatles' oldies but goldies, which at the time simply smacked of the record label, trying to cash in on the Christmas sales period, and the track listing reflected this. Although a long-faced mustachioed McCartney was photographed at the premiere of the Family Way film, the Beatles were mostly absent from public view at this point, and were moving away from their teeny bopper audience, which was now being catered for by a group of actors come musicians and their Monkees TV show. Time for a change, and out with the old Beatles and in with the new Monkees. Long-playing records first became widely available in Britain during the mid-1950s and were mainly bought by fans of classical music, opera, jazz and musicals. Their long-playing capacity was irrelevant to the format of popular songs, radio programming and jukeboxes that were the main source of record promotion and ultimately sales. LPs were more expensive than 78 RPM records and required more sophisticated phonographic equipment, the likes of which only well-off fans of highbrow music could afford. Even as late as 1965, less than a third of British households owned such equipment. Designated as packaged products by the recording industry, LPs were the first records to be sold in foot-square cardboard sleeves faced with glossy cover art, which teenage fans could pore over in the privacy of their bedrooms, and moon over their idols, or look for those hidden clues and meanings. The LP cover became a companion to the listening experience, and it was this aspect of the long-playing record that sealed its success. By the end of January 1967, the Monkees' debut album had reached the top of the UK album charts. Yes, even knocking off my aunt's beloved Sound of Music film soundtrack from the #1 position. Using pocket money I'd saved, and some of the money I received for my birthday, I bought a copy of The Who's A Quick One, and Cream's debut album Fresh Cream, costing 32 shillings and sixpence each. The Quick One was The Who's second album, and following my mod tendencies, a natural progression for me, as I bought their first album, My Generation. A Quick One featured the first mini-opera, A Quick One While He's Away, which led on to Townsend's Tommy Opera, and the mod-based Quadrophenia 1973 concept double album. Hooked by Eric Clapton's fiery guitar playing on the B note, buying Fresh Cream was a must, especially as Cream comprised the best musicians at the time. The songs didn't contain any boy meets girl moon in June lyrics. In fact, the lyrics weren't really up to much. That didn't really matter. It was all about the blues rock music being played with fierce virtuosity, especially Clapton's lead guitar solos. Cream replaced the Beatles in my adoration. The Stones were in the album charts with Between the Buttons, the weaker follow-up to Aftermath, with Mick still having a misogynistic dig at his former girlfriend, Chrissy Shrimpton, on the track Yesterday's Papers. The rest of the charts were made up of squeaky clean imaged mums and dads middle-of-the-road favourites. The Australian group The Seekers, the ever-wholesome erstwhile rock and roller Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and American country and western crooner Jim Reeves. Needless to say, all were everything I detested in music then and now. The Monkees' single I'm a Believer, written by Neil Diamond from their second album More of the Monkees, released on the 9th of January, also went to the UK #1 spot. Almost overnight, the Monkees had a #1 album and single in the UK charts, all without them playing a single instrument on their records. And ironically, there was me listening to Cream, the best musicians England had to offer. So, at this time, the UK charts featured the latest American teeny bopper band at #1, with the rest of the chart made up of middle-of-the-road, easy-listening mums and dads music, and established English bands breaking new ground, and continuing to produce new musical concepts and genres, in the form of pop operas and blues rock. The Beatles left their audience a clue of what was to come, with the last track of their Revolver album, Tomorrow Never Knows, a glimpse of psychedelia that was to follow. Strawberry Fields Forever was released on the 13th of February 1967 as a double A-side single with Penny Lane. It represented a departure from the group's previous singles and a novel listening experience for the contemporary pop audience. While the song initially divided and confused music critics and the group's fans, it proved highly influential on the emerging psychedelic genre. Its accompanying promotional film is recognised as a pioneering work in the medium of music video. That's according to Wikipedia. It was in those Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane videos that teenagers, like me at the time, first saw the mustachioed Beatles on film, wearing their new outfits and heard their new psychedelical musical direction, which was nothing short of a revelation. The music video for the song was not filmed at Penny Lane. Instead, street scenes were filmed in and around Angel Lane in London's East End. The sequence of Lennon walking alone was filmed in the King's Road in Chelsea. The outdoor scenes for Penny Lane were filmed at Knoll Park in Sevenoaks on the 30th of January 1967, as was the promotional film for Strawberry Fields Forever during the same visit. As Lennon said, nothing is real. And it certainly wasn't when it came to the photo fakery of moustaches. in the February and March editions of the Beatles book monthly fanzine, and the mustachioed images that led to the June 1967 Sgt. Pepper edition of the publication. Looking back now, it's hard to find a simple, logical reason as to why someone, in pre-Photoshop days, would go to so much trouble to add moustaches to pre-existing photos of the Beatles and Paul in particular, without going down the Paul is dead conspiracy route or any of its many variants. This slide shows the chronological progress of the moustache from October 1966 through its appearance as fake manipulated cover photos on Beatles book monthly magazines, and ultimately the cover of Sgt. Pepper itself. The album even came with a fake cardboard cutout moustache, and Jimmy Savile joined in with the fake moustache business at the Sgt. Pepper's press launch. Strawberry Fields Forever quickly became my all-time favourite Beatles song, and one of my favourite songs of all time, a view which to my delight was not shared by the older generation, especially not my friend's mother, who doted on Engelbert Humperdinck and loved his schmaltzy Release Me. With Strawberry Fields there was no possibility of my parents' generation singing along like they did with the inane She Loves You, something I rejoiced in. The teeny bopper safe Beatles were no more. At last, the Beatles were the property of the teenage generation again, who grew up with their music. But much to my disappointment, the older generation had the last word, and a victory of sorts, which they believed validated their superior taste in music, when Engelbert Humperdinck's Release Me kept the Beatles' greatest single off the #1 spot in the UK. A travesty if ever there was one. That my parents' generation and older folks actually bought a record sung by someone with such a goofy name summed it all up for me, obviously a fake name. But he had more success with it than his first outing as Jerry Dorsey. The music was awful, like having treacle poured in your ear. Little did I know that Guns for Hire, Big Jim Sullivan, and his student, the future Led Zeppelin axeman, Jimmy Page, both played on Engelbert's Release Me recording session. Sgt. Pepper would have the last word in the generational divide of musical tastes, when the album went to #1, and psychedelia became a music genre in its own right, with groups and artists as diverse as the Stones, the Hollies, the Small Faces, the Bee Gees, Cream, Pink Floyd, the Incredible String Band, Donovan, and arguably the Monkees, dabbled in what would become one of my favourite music genres. And yes, the Sound of Music soundtrack was still in the UK album chart, and Sgt. Pepper reached the #1 spot. Unbelievably, my auntie's favourite was still in the charts for its 112th week, and was sitting at the #2 spot, one position up from Jimi Hendrix's debut Are You Experienced album. In 1967, the Monkees singles reached the upper reaches of the UK singles charts no less than 6 times, with I'm a Believer, which reached #1, Last Train to Clarksville, A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You, alternative title, Pleasant Valley Sunday, and Daydream Believer. When the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper reached the #1 spot in the UK album charts, the Monkees had 2 albums in the charts at the same time, with their debut album still at the #10 position after 19 weeks, and their second album also in the charts. Similar to the Beach Boys being on tour in Japan when Brian Wilson created Pet Sounds, the Monkees learned about more of the Monkees' existence while on tour in Cleveland, Ohio, and were surprised it had been released without their knowing. More of the Monkees has Nesmith limited to one song as lead vocalist, so no wonder he was furious about the album, claiming it to be probably the worst album in the history of the world. Nesmith lobbied successfully with the group's creators for the Monkees to be allowed to play their instruments on future records, effectively giving the quartet artistic control, and that would be the point where things started to go wrong. The Monkees' biggest mistake was when they started to believe that they were a group, rather than four individuals hired to play the role of one. With the birth of the concept album, for example The Who's mini opera, A Quick One While He's Away, and the Beatles with their alter egos appearing on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, sales of LPs eventually overtook those of singles as a recording format. The older generation, although no longer able to sing along with all of the Beatles songs, got their very own crooners in Tom Jones and his stablemate Engelbert Humperdinck. And the Beatles shook off their cute mop-top boy band image, their role now being fulfilled for the younger siblings of their fans with the creation of the Monkees. And with that, the transition was complete.